I'm very grateful that I was raised in a Christian home, and my parents at 6 weeks old made sure that I was dedicated to the Lord. And they raised me in the church. I mean, every time the doors were open, we were there. I have Sunday school pins to prove it. And we were all 6 children were brought up in the church, and were taken to Sunday school every week. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, those potluck dinners I remember very well. But being dedicated to the Lord and church attendance didn't save me. And I remember at 12 years old, very specifically, going through confirmation classes with my pastor. And at that time, he had me memorize John 3:16, and I still remember sitting there and talking with the pastor and quoting John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believed in him would not perish and have everlasting life." And intellectually, I believed that. I believed that God loved me. I believed that Jesus died for me. But an intellectual understanding didn't save me, and it couldn't. I remember singing in the youth choir. I was very involved in the church, and singing in the youth choir. I remember at times I just felt the presence of God, and I wanted to be close to him, but an emotional experience couldn't save me, and it didn't. At 19 years old, I remember specifically, because it's as if God himself intervened in my life, and I think that's where salvation begins, where God intervenes. And I remember my spiritual eyes were open for the first time, and I understood I'm lost. I have all of this knowledge of God, but I don't know him. And my brother-in-law, Joe Shrigley, just happened to be visiting in our home. He was in the seminary at the time, and he was married to my oldest sister. And I went to him with tears, and I said, "Joe, I know a lot about God, but there's something missing." And I felt this huge void in my life for the first time. And it seemed like the size of the Grand Canyon. And I was trying to fill it up a teaspoon at a time with things of the world, and I just couldn't do it. And with tears, I asked him, "What's wrong?" And he went through a very simple explanation of the gospel. And for the very first time, I heard it. Not with just my head, but my heart. And I knew that I was lost. And I got on my knees that day with Joe, and I asked Jesus to forgive me, and I asked him to come into my life. And my life has never been the same. I believe every day of my life since I've remembered that account, because it was so life-changing. It was the difference in night and day, darkness and light. And I can't explain it except that God began to initiate that in my life. And I think that's significant, because Jesus said in John 6:44, "Unless no one can come to the Father and to me unless the Father draws him." And I remember that day that God drew me to himself, and God intervened in my life.